Good morning. I'm not Dan Shearson, I'm Krishnan Rajeshwar, in short. We swap places because he's got a talk to give. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the speaker of the first of the three talks we're going to have in this opening session. The first talk focuses on electrochemical storage. Secretary Orr talked about it. So again, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce the speaker. The first speaker, George Crabtree. He's a distinguished fellow at A&L. He serves as the director of the Joint Center for Electrochemical Storage Research. And George is a physicist by training. He's a fellow of the American Physical Society, and he's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He's got a long list of awards and recognitions. I'll urge you to go to the meeting brochure to look it up. I don't want to cut too much into the time they have for the next hour and 10 minutes. And finally, let me also mention one award, recognition George has, the outstanding scientific accomplishment for DOE, which he won 4 separate times. So without further ado, here's George.
So what a pleasure to be here, and I thank Dan and all the organizers for putting this whole session together, which I think is wonderful, and especially Lynn for the Undersecretary, or for the wonderful and inspiring talk that he just gave us. You may have noticed that I'm wearing a boot, and some people have asked what happened. I can simply tell you that yesterday was the Chicago Marathon, and the two events have nothing whatever to do with each other. So I injured my foot standing up from sitting on a sofa. Anyway, so I would like to tell you about JCESR, the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research. The 3 things that I'd like to talk about are there under the outline. Transforming transportation and the electricity grid, and we had a wonderful introduction from Undersecretary Orr, who summarized how important this is to our energy system and how important it is to modernize it, putting storage on the grid in conjunction with being smart. So the 2 things, electricity and storage, have the opportunity to dramatically change how the grid operates. I wanted to say a little bit about that. The other area, of course, is transportation, and again, Lynn was telling us about electric cars, which I noticed while he was speaking. He mentioned that gasoline cars get better all the time, and I remembered that the CAFE standards are due to be doubled by 2026, and that means the bar for electric cars is going up. So although it may, the goal may look like it's within reach now, it's an ever-rising bar that we have to meet. Then I want to talk a lot about JCESR and how it's a new paradigm for doing energy storage research. We've introduced a new way of doing business that combines 4 things into one organization. So it's discovery science, it's battery design, it's research prototyping, and it's manufacturing collaboration. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that those 4 elements, those 4 functions, have been combined in one highly interactive organization. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then some of the things we've been working on. We're halfway through. We're about 2.5 years through our 5-year contract. So I would like to step back and tell you a little bit about where we are and where we're going. But first, if you'd like to know more about JCESR, on the left is a review paper that came out last spring, which means it's about 6 months old and a little bit out of date. But nevertheless, it has the high-level overview beautifully. Pardon me, I'm the author of that, but let's say presented, if not beautifully presented, at least presented. And all of that is still relevant. On the right-hand side is our web page. The URL is there. And it changes often. It's, you can treat it a little bit like the New York Times, browse through it for a couple of hours and not get bored, at least I can. And that's a great place for information. So we all know about our cell phones and our tablets and laptops and now watches. That was enabled by lithium-ion batteries, which came out Sony brought them out in 1991. Nobody knew in 1991 that they would be such a revolutionary change for personal electronics, but they were. You couldn't have had all of the things that you see in that picture without the lithium-ion battery. There are two other transformations waiting to happen. One is for electric cars, and lots of good reasons to do it. They are about 4 times more efficient in energy than gasoline cars. They can reduce carbon emissions dramatically, especially if they're powered by renewable energy. And the second transformation is grid-scale electricity storage. So, of course, we hear about putting wind and solar on the grid, and Lynn was telling us about a 33% target. Actually, California and New York have even higher targets. They're looking at 50%. If you do that, you need something to firm up that generation because it's so variable, depends on whether it's a cloudy day and whether the wind blows or not. Storage is one way to do that, so it's absolutely essential if we want to get those things out. But it does another thing. It breaks an old constraint, and the old constraint, ever since the grid existed, Thomas Edison's days, you have to produce electricity at exactly the same rate that you use it. And this dramatically restricts what the grid can do. You have to build for the peak, for example. The peak demand is about twice the average, so you're building twice the infrastructure that you need to build if you had storage, and it costs you a lot to operate those peaker plants. So this is really a game changer. We heard about, again, from Undersecretary Orr about where the energy goes. This is all the energy that the US used in 2013. The 2 sectors that use the most are the colored ones. The yellow is the electricity grid. Almost 40% of our energy flows through electrons. The next biggest one is the gasoline in your tank. That's about 28%, the red sector. That's nearly combined, nearly 2/3 of the energy. By comparison, the sector that lithium-ion batteries power is mostly personal electronics. That accounts for about 2% of our energy use. So you see the opportunity. If you could capture half of the energy that goes through the electricity grid and transportation, that would be 10 times bigger in energy terms than what lithium-ion batteries today power. So this is the opportunity, it's the challenge, and this is what JCESR goes after. So here, in one slide, is a summary of what JCESR does. So the vision is there: transform transportation in the electricity grid with high performance, low cost energy storage. That would be next generation beyond lithium ion. That's probably a decades long vision to actually accomplish. We have a shorter term mission, and that's deliver electrical energy storage with 5 times the energy density, 1/5 the cost, do it in 5 years. And I would point out that 5 years is the length of the contract that we were allowed to apply for. We did not choose that time scale. We would, of course, like to have a longer one. But we did not want to diminish our vision. So we instead, in a sense, squeezed our vision into this 5-year time scale because this is the goal we're going after. We want to do it by leaving 3 things behind. First thing we want to leave behind is a library of fundamental science about how electricity storage works at the atomic and molecular level. We've had 15 years of at least the word nanoscience, and it frankly has not been applied to energy storage at the level that it could be. So there's a lot to learn about how it works at the atomic and molecular level, and there's a lot of innovation and creativity to start to control how it works at the atomic and molecular level. So that's basic science. That stuff that we discover, we will publish in the open literature and share at meetings like this one. And we hope that that helps to lift all ships, so that helps the entire community. The second thing we'd like to leave behind are the 2 prototypes, one for the car, one for the grid. They'll probably look very different, because the car battery has to be really small, fit under the hood, and drive you hundreds of miles on a single charge. The grid battery can be bigger. You don't care so much about the footprint. You can put it in a shed and control the environment. So 2 very different uses and use cases, but they might be based on the same set of fundamental knowledge that we get from our first legacy. And the third legacy is maybe the most important. It's a new paradigm for doing battery R&D, as I mentioned, combining 4 things in one. So discovery science, battery design, research prototyping, and manufacturing collaboration. And this because if this works, this could be applied to other big national challenges that we heard about, some of which we heard about in Lynn's talk. So it's quite adaptable, and I think our job is to get the bugs out of this system, make it work, and show how effective it can be. So a few lessons from lithium ion. This is a chart that shows from 1970 till now the progress in lithium ion, and actually go back to 71, that's where the concept appeared. Let's have a lithium metal anode, let's have an intercalation cathode, and the favorite cathode at the time was TiS2. What came out in 1991, 20 years later, was something very different. Did not have a lithium metal anode. Dendrites were discovered in 77, and that so far has stymied the use of lithium anodes. It did not have a titanium disulfide cathode. It has a cobalt oxide and other derivative cathodes, and it took 20 years to do. There has been steady progress since. So the red line is how fast the energy density has gone up. It's gone up about a factor of 3 since 1991. And the blue line is the cost, which has come down by about a factor of 10. So a few lessons from this story. First, there was a 20-year incubation period. Wouldn't we like to shorten that? And the new paradigm that JCESR introduces, that's our goal. Let's see if we can do that. Lots of simple, elegant ideas, such as a lithium metal anode, really high capacity and energy density. Most of those ideas don't work. And the reason, if you look at the number of failed ideas, in fact, the gray spots on that diagram are lithium anode batteries that were commercialized and had to be withdrawn from the market because the idea simply was too hard to do. And the reason is simple. There's nothing wrong with the ideas. They're elegant. They should work. They store energy. They release energy. There are competing side reactions, typically at the interfaces, that have nothing to do with storing or releasing energy, but use up the active ingredients or use up the electrolyte. And so the battery, that idea, fails. And that means that you need a lot of backup plans. So when your primary idea fails, you need a backup plan. So we call that convergent research. That's the idea that we would like to work, our favorite idea, the most promising one. But we also do divergent research, which are 3 alternatives. When the first one fails, our convergent one, we'll move one of the divergent ones into first place and develop that. So this is clearly very important. 2 lessons from lithium ion. Lots of strategic pivots, so you can't be stuck with one idea. You have to change. And a balance of convergent and divergent research. So here is our new paradigm. You see on the left the red, that's the discovery science. There are 3 labels there. Multivalent intercalation, chemical transformation, and non-aqueous redox flow. I'll tell you a little bit more about later. Then battery design, research prototyping, and manufacturing collaboration. We bring some special tools to the table. We do genomic, materials genome type simulation of materials for the anode, the cathode, and the electrolyte on the computer before we make them in the laboratory. We now have about 16,000 organic molecules in the electrolyte genome, which are candidates for the electrolytes and active materials. And with the materials project, that's for the crystalline electrodes. We've looked at lots of combinations, for example, of divalent and trivalent working ions with cathodes. So on the experimental side, we look at interfaces in a thing called the Electrochemical Discovery Lab. So to synthesize those interfaces, either single crystalline or nanoparticle, and apply all kinds of X-ray, infrared, STM, TEM, lots of other techniques to look at them and find out what's going on, because that interface is the very heart and soul of electrochemistry. That's where the action is. We simulate systems, so battery systems on the computer, techno-economic modeling. So very much like the materials in the genomic simulations in the upper left. These are, give me an anode, give me an electrolyte, give me a cathode. I'll put them all together. I'll simulate, project how well the battery will work. I'll look at two characteristics. What's the energy density, because that's our main target for performance, and what's the cost? That's the second 5 that we'd like to achieve. So this lets us filter the ideas on the computer before we put them together. And all 3 of these tools should, we hope, speed up the process of innovation. The 4th idea we bring is an idea called sprint. So we structure our research by asking, if we want to go after a certain prototype, what are the 5 biggest challenges that we have to overcome if we're going to reach that prototype? We identify them. We take maybe the top 2, and we put together a team of 5 to 15 people from our 180 or so researchers that JCESR comprises to address that question and give an answer. We give them a short time, maybe 4 to 6 months. What's the answer? When the answer comes back, of course, we share it, and we use it to make our next strategic decisions. What will we do next? Maybe drop this idea if it looks not very promising, or if we've solved it, let's go to the next challenge. So this is a very good way to structure our research. So I think we all know what a lithium-ion battery does. Here's a picture that shows lithium ions moving back and forth between the anode and the cathode. Both are intercalation processes, sometimes called a rocking chair. When it moves from the anode to the cathode, it releases energy. When the lithium ion moves from the cathode to the anode, it stores. So it stores, it releases as it rocks back and forth. What are we going to do different? Well, first thing to do is take that lithium ion with a single charge and replace it with magnesium, calcium, zinc, something with 2 charges or 3 charges like aluminum, and immediately double or triple the energy stored for each ionic transition. So great idea, why don't we just do this? It turns out that all the anodes, electrolytes, and cathodes that work for lithium don't work for magnesium and the other divalent materials. So you have to rediscover these things all over again. Second idea is get rid of the intercalation. So let's have a chemical reaction. Real chemical bonds, covalent chemical bonds that form. Turns out you can store a lot more energy in covalent chemical bonds than you can in intercalation. A favorite is sulfur with lithium, shown here as a metal anode, something that we have not been able to do yet. But of course, that's the holy grail in a sense. That's the goal. And you would get, on paper, 10 times the energy density of lithium ion if, theoretically, everything worked perfectly. Third idea is to get rid of the crystalline electrodes altogether, replace them with a fluid. So let the ions be in solution, or let them be nanoparticles in suspension. That scales beautifully for the grid. You just make the liquid tank bigger. You can store as much energy as you like. It lets you separate energy from power. And on the grid, very often, you need one or the other, but not both. And our idea is to use organic materials as the active materials because A, there's so many of them. B, you can tailor them. You can hang ligands off, say, a carbon ring, and really change the solubility, the electrochemical activity, and other things. So, and C, you can recycle. So if you, these are simple materials and benign on the environment. So those are the ideas. Let me now compare lithium ion with beyond lithium ion. So I'm plotting here systems, so concepts. How would you put the battery together? And at the bottom there you see lithium ion, that yellow space. It's basically one concept. It's intercalation at the anode, it's intercalation at the cathode. On the horizontal axis, the materials for lithium ion, there may be 5 to 10 materials that are in play for the various lithium ion batteries. By contrast, the beyond lithium ion space is much bigger. So I talked about 3 concepts we're pursuing. You can do those 3 at the anode, you can do them at the cathode. 3 times 3 is 9 combinations. The electrolyte can be solid or liquid, there's 18. So there's at least 18 different ways to think about constructing a beyond lithium ion battery, and they're represented by those cartoons. For the materials, there may be 30 to 50 materials which are in play, much bigger than, say, the 5 to 10 for lithium ion. And so you put these combinations together, the 3 concepts, and I'm being very conservative here, there are 50 to 100 batteries in that big blue space that you could think about making. If you're Thomas Edison, you'll probably be frustrated. So you'll make the first one, doesn't work, well, I'll make the second one, that doesn't work, let me make the third one. So it takes forever to explore that space. So you need a different paradigm, and that's what we bring to the table. We bring the two computational techniques for the battery systems and for the materials. We want to throw away the 80% of ideas that probably won't work. And we want to concentrate on the 20% that at least have a chance of working. So I wanted to, one more overview point, then I'll get to some specifics. Battery technology readiness levels, what kind of prototype are we going to make? So one of our earlier reviews, or in fact the first review, which happened, by the way, 8 months after we launched. DOE is very serious about managing us, and we definitely appreciate that. That's all to the good. But one of the reviewers said, oh, you'll make a prototype, you'll stick it under a Chevy Volt, you'll drive it around for a couple of months, you'll see if it works. That's not really what we're going to do. We're going to make a prototype that I can hold in my hand. It'll probably have wires sticking off of it, so it'll be very much a laboratory thing. As you see in the fourth level there at the bottom, that's the level we're targeting. It might be a little more finished and packaged as shown in the upper picture. And on the right, that is the 5, the very right-hand side of that diagram, we'll transfer that to a manufacturer who will make a product prototype, something that you might put under the hood of a Chevy Volt and drive around. You see lots of arrows on this diagram, and that indicates that there's a lot of back and forth in this prototype business. The first one will definitely fail and not do what you want. But you'll use that to learn, and you'll go back to fundamental materials or to systems or to some of the basics for putting the batteries together. So let me now summarize where we are. 2.5 years in, what have we got? Well, we have 4 ideas for the battery, 2 on the transportation side, 2 on the grid side. Let's start at the top. That's the grid side, the upper part of that diagram. Redox flow, we would like to use magnesium. We would like to use organic materials. We have 2 ideas that I think are original with JCESR. Instead of having an active organic molecule that's by itself, hook it on to a polymer chain, a polymer backbone, and connect them. That gives you at least one direction, which is much longer than the others, and you can control that molecule. In particular, you can filter it from migrating from the anode side to the cathode side, and basically shorting out the battery with a porous hole, because this polymer length may be quite long. If the second idea based on that is, why stop with a polymer? Why not cross-link that polymer and make a colloidal particle? So something that might be 3/4 of a micron or a micron in size, that's your active particle. That's trivial to filter and keep, let's say, only on the cathode side or the anode side. You can do it with a cell guard membrane that you buy off the shelf for $1. So this is the idea. The challenge now is to find the active materials that will work there. The second idea, lithium sulfur flow, there's one on the battery on the grid side, there's one on the transportation side. The problem there is the polysulfide, so lithium reacting with sulfur goes through 5 or 6 maybe intermediate states, and the polysulfides that are formed in those intermediate states migrate from the cathode to the anode. They short out the battery. So we have 3 ideas, I'll show you what those are, to solve that, in which would open the way for both of these directions forward. And the last idea, the multivalent idea at the bottom, magnesium is our favorite multivalent working ion. We have in the last year demonstrated that manganese oxide spinel intercalates magnesium and is a viable cathode for a magnesium battery. What do we need to do? We need to get to proof of concept prototypes over here. You do that with these convergent research lines. You have to find the materials, you have to make components out of them. So an anode is more than just a material. It may have a binder in it, it may have a current collector. Then you have to integrate those components into a battery system. And very importantly, you see these these red arrows, the divergent research. We expect many of these convergent ideas will fail. So we're maintaining a divergent research posture all the way through the end of year 5 to have something to move into place when those failures occur. So now what have we really done? Well, the transportation energy storage in 2014, we had already sifted through on the computer lots of cathodes. And you see on the left some mobility diagrams. This is now published. We had looked at the electrolytes, so magnesium solvation shells in a diglyme electrolyte with TFSI, and found that indeed there is almost always an anion in the first solvation shell of magnesium. This turns out to be true of divalent working ions because the charge is doubled and there's a lot more electrostatic force, and that attracts the anions from the salt. And this changes the way that the electrolyte operates. So this was a breakthrough. And we had put together a couple of battery systems with V2O5, in a sense, our backup cathode. In the last year, we demonstrated that the manganese oxide spinel indeed does intercalate. We found 2 new electrolytes that work with magnesium on the anode side. They are not quite high voltage enough to work with the cathodes that we'd like to use. And on the cathode side, I mentioned V2O5. We published something about the effect of water on V2O5 and found several divalent ions, and we're now ready to make a test battery system with 2 electrolytes and 2 cathodes, and magnesium as the working ion. With lithium sulfur, I mentioned in the upper right there, the diagram, lithium reacts with sulfur to form through a few intermediate states, the SX polysulfides. The problem is to keep them from going into solution, migrating to the anode and shorting the battery. So we have 3 ideas for doing this. Cathodes that trap the polysulfides, you'll hear more about this from Kevin Zavadil. Sparingly solvent electrolyte, so the electrolyte is fully occupied solvating the salt and has no capacity left to solvate the polysulfides. And protecting the lithium anode with an SEI that might be put down by an ALD coating or might be formed spontaneously by a reaction of the electrolyte with the anode. Non-aqueous redox flow, I mentioned already the punchline. 2 years ago, we were looking at molecules that would be active. In 2014, we said, why not make a polymer? So stick them on a backbone, you can control them a lot better. Last year we said, why not cross-link that polymer and make it into a colloidal particle? You can filter even better. And this opens up, there's a diagram of what we need to do. This opens up essentially 100% perfect filtration. And the challenge is to design the active polymers and colloids for that system. We have in the electrolyte genome, I mentioned we have now, in 2015, had something like 4,000 molecules in the database. Now we have 16,000. And we've discovered a new effect, and that is, here's the diagram, that if you have TFSI and diglyme as your solvent, and if the magnesium transfers its charge to the electrode in 2 steps, first one charge, then the second charge, it turns out that the TFSI anion is unstable. It cleaves. It leaves the detritus probably on the anode, which could upset the stripping and plating reaction. And further work showed that, at least projected in the electrolyte genome in simulations, that the diglyme is also unstable. So this opens up a whole new set of opportunities, but also challenges. So this is my last slide. It's the same slide that I showed you before. The take-home message is at the bottom in yellow. It's a bold new approach to battery R&D. We want to accelerate the pace of discovery and innovation, and we want to bring the community into the big blue space of beyond lithium ion and attract some more players to make the process go faster. So thank you, and happy to answer questions. Any questions? Do I have to call on someone? There's a question. Yeah, that's a big issue. And in fact, separately from JCESR at Argonne, there is a group does lots of life cycle analyses and availability of lithium. They were looking primarily for lithium-ion batteries, so we would need more for a pure lithium metal anode. But the conclusion was that there probably is enough, and it would be very helpful to recycle. So if you can recycle all the lithium from the old batteries, probably that problem is addressable, is tractable. But that's a great question. Yeah. One more.
So you mentioned that many ideas did not work over the years. So what's the criteria for ideas working?
Well, so I mentioned in these sprints, we define the top 4 or 5 challenges. If we can't meet the top challenge, it doesn't work. So, and we'll typically assign a sprint to answer that question. They may come back with 3 answers. It's never going to work. Throw it out. Or it won't work now, but there's a chance that something else will make it work, and so we'll send that problem back to our discovery science teams and say, work on this, here's what you need to fix. Or, yeah, we can do that, so then we'll go on to the next challenge. If you get all the way through the top 5, success. You've got a prototype that's going to work, but the chances of doing that are rather low. And I think you have to go into this process with that in mind. If you put all your eggs in one basket like a startup would do, the outcome may not be so good, and I'll leave it at that.